Hi, and welcome to EdTech Bytes Generative Artificial Intelligence. And I'll just repeat one more time that we hope you'll go onto social media, hashtag AI for Adult Ed, to continue the conversation and build a forum around which we can all interact on this topic and begin to dive in together. This is our first webinar in the 4-part series. Again, we'll be doing this every Friday for 30 minutes. And during today's webinar, we really want to just kind of set a foundation for all of us to have a common language and a common understanding. So we'll talk about what generative artificial intelligence is, and of course, why it matters specifically to us as educators, but also to us as humans. Something I will be pointing out throughout the webinar are the different ways that I'm using generative AI, and this is one of them. So if you're looking at my screen right now, and specifically over in this right-hand portion, you'll see some images of cute robots, and I'm wondering if you guys can identify which of those cute robots you have seen before. Because one of them was created using all of them were created using generative AI, but one of them is from this slide that we just passed over, and it's this guy. So I created this robot, the image of the robot, not the robot, he's not real, using a tool called Canva. Canva is one of the top 10 EdTech tools. I know tons of teachers who use it, as well as designers and people in marketing. It's an amazing tool, and they have a feature within Canva called text to image, where you can type in a prompt like cute, innocent, non-intimidating robot, and it will produce several images for you to choose from and use in your designs. This feature within Canva is built on an image generating model called Stable Diffusion. Maybe that sounds like gibberish, but it's important because we want to connect that there are some very complex technologies at play, but they are coming into many of the tools that we already use. And so it helps to understand what they are and what exactly we are interacting with. I also want to give a lot of attention to the human intelligence that contributed to today's presentation, namely our Vice President of the US Division, Priyanka Sharma, who is on the call today and has helped me so much in developing the key points that we want to address during today's webinar. And then myself, I'm Rachel Riggs, I'm Technical Advisor at World Education. Yes, these images, these headshots are AI generated. These are not from our LinkedIn profiles. I'm Rachel Riggs. I work on several research and training and technical assistance projects for our EdTech Center at World Education. I also host our monthly EdTech strategy sessions that we host throughout the traditional school year of September to May. And I facilitate many of our EdTech makerspaces. So you could say I'm just a little bit interested in education and technology and educational technology. We're really excited to offer you guys a badge for your participation in the webinar series because we're so impressed and excited that there's so much interest in learning about this technology and really considering how we can use it in educational settings. So you can earn a badge by attending or watching all of the webinars and completing a follow-up survey. I also want to give credit to another human, Ebony Vandross, who designed the beautiful and sleek badge. We will be sharing more details about the badge in a follow-up email. So just keep an eye on the email that you registered with, and we will answer the questions I'm sure you have about what if I have to miss a webinar, where do I access the survey, etc. So throughout the webinar series and really throughout the month of May, you can expect to be seeing a lot of resources from us. So, the badge is one thing, but we are also developing a landing page on this topic on our EdTech Center site. We are building artificial intelligence terminology into our digital skills glossary. So we're going to be sharing a lot of the resources that we're working on throughout the month. We already have questions about copyright concerns. How do you cite the image? Cool. This is fun. A lot of questions already. So what you can expect today, this is a good time for this slide. We're going to talk about the basics of AI. Like I said, I really want to just kind of level set with some key definitions and an understanding of how this technology is being used and the ways you already interact with it. I'll give lots of examples of what it can do in addition to just the images that I'm using. And we'll talk about where to go from here and why this matters and what the impact will be on education. Some things I won't talk about because we want to dive into them deeper in subsequent webinars. The first one is deepfakes, plagiarism, and originality. So we're not going to go deep into that today. We only have 30 minutes. But next Friday on May 12th, Jeff Gomez will be talking a lot about those concerns and questions. So I'll mention them, but won't be going deep into them. I also will not be demonstrating a conversation with ChatGPT. I know a lot of people are interested in the tool and how to use it. And it definitely is interesting and fun to use. But I'm going to be kind of talking more broadly about the technology, and we will on May 19th be sharing some really incredible ways that educators and employers are using ChatGPT and some of these other tools to teach, to increase their own productivity, to let's think like in an IET type of setting to adapt standard work instructions. Shout out to our friend Anson Green, who has been a big ChatGPT fan and enthusiast. So May 19th is the time to really hear about how it's used. And then we won't go deep into ethical considerations during this webinar either. We'll do that on May 26th. So I'm going to be giving kind of an overview. I'll be mentioning all of these things, but again, this is kind of our basics, getting our common language and common understanding and buy-in. So you guys are already doing it. I don't think I need to talk about this, but throw your questions in the chat, not in the chat, in the Q&A, and we will try to address them throughout the webinar. I have many colleagues who are very intelligent, who can respond to your questions, and I will also stick around at the end of today's webinar to get to questions. So let's start with what it is that we're talking about. Generative artificial intelligence. And the natural place to start is, what is artificial intelligence? Artificial intelligence is a field of computer science where machines do tasks that would normally require what we consider human-like intelligence. And you already, whether you are aware of it or not, interact with artificial intelligence in your everyday life. If you own a mobile phone or really any kind of device and access to the internet. So one way that you might be seeing artificial intelligence at work in your everyday life is the use of Face ID. So if you pick up your phone and unlock it with your face, or unlock certain applications with your face, that is powered by artificial intelligence. If you use Google Maps, and see that Google Maps has prioritized a route for you because it's been able to consider multiple variables and the context in which you are traveling, that is artificial intelligence at work. It's making a lot of decisions and bringing in a lot of context and solving problems to come up with what would be the ideal route for you. If you use streaming services or any really kind of app that gives you personalized recommendations, whether it's a learning app, whether it's a shopping app, or even just a streaming app like Netflix or social media, which gives you a lot of ads and recommendations. That's another place that you're seeing artificial intelligence at work in your everyday life. Okay, lots of great stuff in the Q&A. Thanks, guys. Do use the hashtag AI and adult ed. I can see you guys want to interact, which is very exciting. And I hope that you will go onto social media so that we can expand the conversation beyond just today's webinar. So go onto social media, use the hashtag AI and adult ed. and comment and question and share and do your thing so that we can keep talking throughout the month about how this will impact us and what our thoughts are. So like I said, you see AI at work in your life in these kind of complex tasks that machines are able to do. And a question may be, well, how do we say that a certain technology is artificial intelligence? Why is my dishwasher not artificial intelligence? It's washing dishes like a human does. And there are, of course, certain determining factors that computer scientists look for when they are determining whether a machine has human-like intelligence. These are some of them, not all of them. I'm not a computer scientist. I know just enough to be dangerous, but it would look for, problem solving. Can it solve problems? Can it learn and develop knowledge? Can it make decisions? Can it understand and use language, right? So these are some things that they look for to say whether something is demonstrating artificial intelligence. There's also something that you'll hear about a lot when we're talking about artificial intelligence called the Turing test. And it is a somewhat controversial, possibly outdated test that was developed back in the 1950s that had a huge impact on the way that scientists develop artificial intelligence today. And the Turing test, I see your question, Dr. Ron. It would be AI in adult ed, AI in adult ed. Jerry is typing an answer as well to make sure I didn't get that wrong. So the Turing test, like I said, developed back in the 1950s, and the idea is I, as a human, would interact with a machine and a human without knowing exactly which is which. And if I can't tell the difference between the two interactions and say, oh, this is the machine, then the machine has not achieved human-like intelligence. That's the basic idea. It's called the imitation game of the machine trying to act like a human. Now, there's been tons of iterations and developments on the Turing test. So it's, a very simple concept that helps us understand, but I don't want any backlash from the computer scientists in the room on my description. It helps us to think about how these things are measured, especially as educators, right, who are often trying to identify or answer the question of what is intelligence. So other ways that we see AI at work. In the workforce, you probably know that when you apply for a job, there are mechanisms through which they automate the screening of resumes and scan different resumes to determine which applicant is is ideal for a certain position. In education, you've probably seen it at work through computer adaptive testing, which is basically just an assessment that responds to a student's answers and brings them down different paths depending on their answers. If you use Best Plus 2.0 has a computer adaptive test, CASA's e-test has an element of computer adaptive testing. And so this is really built into probably many of the e-learning as well as assessment systems that you might use. Now, you might notice something about my images here. You may have picked up on the fact that they are a little bit strange. These are generated by AI, but they do help us see that while the technology is sophisticated and impressive, it is not perfect. You can see in these images that there are just a few flaws here. So this one was created again in Canva. This one was created using a tool called DALL-E 2. But those are all, just examples of how we see artificial intelligence in our life. And then in those two images, we saw generative artificial intelligence, which is a form of artificial intelligence that doesn't repeat or just predict or have a decision tree, but it actually is generating new data. So it's not just repeating the data that you fed it, it's generating new data, text, images, audio, code, and even new data sets. So some ways you might have seen this, and we're going to kind of get into why it's a little bit of a squishy problem right now. Some ways you might have seen it, but probably don't know that you even saw it, would be on possibly social media. So if you have seen a certain organization or company post a blurb on anything with a couple hashtags, that could have been generated by ChatGPT. That's a way that the chatbot ChatGPT is used in marketing and communications to develop blurbs and hashtags for social media. Yes, I asked ChatGPT what hashtag we should use for this webinar, but I did not ultimately choose any of the options it gave me. So transparency. And then, in images. So if you see this image of the construction workers over here, it's actually quite realistic looking, but it is a fake image. So you may have seen images that were generated by artificial intelligence and not necessarily have known that. And these are kind of two big buckets that we will be focusing on throughout the webinar series: large language models and image generators. We'll talk about other things. There are other things, but these are two of kind of the most popular kinds of AI models that we are seeing infiltrate the different tools that we use. So you may have heard of large language models, which are purposed for natural language processing and being able to take huge language data sets and produce natural sounding language. Or you may have heard of image generators, which usually are a text to image type of tool where you type in a prompt and you're given an image in response to that prompt. Although there are other, sometimes it's an image, you give it several images and it gives you an image, different ways of it, but it's generating images. How do these things work? And here we go. I'm going to go ahead and get back into my computer science degree that I don't have. Basically how it works is there are large data sets. And I always like to think of this as a library. When you walk into a library, you are going to see walls and walls of books. You're also going to see CDs, DVDs, movies, computers, the internet, audio. Like, what do you see in a library? Art. You see all of these artifacts, right? And those are kind of like, a library would be like a large data set where there's billions of data that go into these systems. And then they apply, the computer scientists, the developers apply deep learning algorithms to that data to help the machine learn and get to the point where it can generate, right? So there's this deep learning process. It's kind of like, you think about electricity, it's all of these currents flowing and making different connections and then sometimes stopping and rerouting. And that's kind of what it looks like. And some people refer to it as a neural network. So you can imagine just all of these different complex connections, math and science that go into these algorithms that help the machine develop its ability to learn and to generate data. And then the most critical part of all of this are the human users, right? It's nothing without us. I like to always remind myself of that. And so really how it works is very dependent on how we use it and what we decide to do with it. And what we, especially as consumers, like to get out of it and how we want to apply it in our lives. And so that's a very, very big part of the picture. So I've shared with you a few examples of images that are generated through AI. And you can kind of look here and see that there's a whole range and spectrum of sophistication, and you can identify different flaws and then also really impressive potential with what it's able to produce. One of the big flaws that is not here, but that we will talk about many times throughout the series, is bias. And so if you have read my blog, I posted a blog on this for our EdTech Center vlogs about when I use Padlet's I Can't Draw, and I was given a set of images that really only represented one type of person, even though I hadn't given it any specification as to, what the person should look like. So you can get kind of, there's a lot of those kinds of issues as well that we will address. And then when it comes to the large language models, what they are really good at is natural language processing. And it's so impressive just that they have been able to, oh, thank you, Priyanka shared the link to the blog. Thanks, Priyanka. In the large language models, the big impressive thing is their ability to apply different predictions to natural language processing and produce stuff that sounds really good. And I say it in that very untechnical way because it's important to know that really that's what the technology does. It produces stuff that sounds really good. They are still working on it producing stuff that is actually really good and accurate. But it's important to recognize that the benefit of talking to ChatGPT or these other chatbot tools is that you can come out with stuff that sounds really good, and then you can apply your human intelligence to it. So some examples of how people use these tools like ChatGPT and others are developing lesson plans, thinking about catchy titles to put on their blog or their webinar series, getting feedback on essays, having a simulated conversation. Maybe you're trying to learn a language. You can also use it for language translation, to write songs, to write poetry, to extract key vocabulary from a passage and give definitions for that vocabulary. It really has a lot of uses for anything that is language oriented. So what we get down to, we've seen kind of, okay, this is how it works, this is what it can do, and then we really need to think about why does any of this matter, right? Why don't I just go to ChatGPT and use it in all of these ways? Why do I need to understand the technology behind it? Or why do I, as an educator, how does it apply to my actual practice? And it's important to know a little bit of the timeline and history behind these things. In November of 2022, OpenAI released ChatGPT, the chatbot that I've been referring to. And what it did was it essentially put out a very impressive generative artificial intelligence tool to the public and helped us make a connection to the technology and see how it can be applied and what it can look like in our lives and in our work. And from there, a lot of snowball effect happened in the development of generative artificial intelligence. And so we see how other companies started to release. Microsoft released its own version, Google released its own version, and the list keeps growing and the technology keeps proliferating into these other tools, but then also into the very tools that we use. Like I showed you with Canva, the technology is built into a tool that many people already use. So how do we navigate that changing landscape of technology? The first thing we have to remember is that we've been here before, where technology impacts what we teach. When the internet was introduced, Web 1.0, we had to rethink what information literacy meant and how and what we would teach about it. When social media started being used widely, we had to rethink how and what we teach about media literacy. And of course, the pandemic had a huge impact on what we teach in terms of digital literacy. These things also impact how we teach or how we educate. The internet started the bulletin board systems that now have had an impact on learning management systems that we use today. Social media has had an impact on the way that programs recruit students and retain students. The pandemic had a huge impact on remote learning. So all of these emergent technologies impact what we teach and how we teach, but we've navigated the waters before. And the most important thing that we can focus our energy on when we're talking about a new technology like this is digital resilience. So that is digital resilience on many different levels. The individual level, right? The digital resilience of a person and what digital skills they will need to use the technology. There's the digital resilience of the processes that we have in place and how they adapt and change according to new technology, and the resilience of the systems, the societal systems that are in place. And we're already seeing how organizations and those systems are responding to this groundbreaking development in generative artificial intelligence, with the White House publishing a blueprint for the Bill of Rights for AI, and USAID publishing their action plan in response to AI. We internally at World Education and JSI are working on how we will address the issue of generative AI. So there are right now, I think, more questions than there are answers, but that's why this is the most crucial time for us as educators to be involved in the process, involved in the conversations, and also being agents of change in our classroom and in our practice to make sure that all of our learners are included in the way that these policies and processes get developed. So that's it. Woo! I did it. Okay, we have 2 minutes. So that's what we have for today. Again, 30 minutes, you guys, every Friday. It's just your little EdTech bite-sized webinar for you to be able to kind of take another step in developing your knowledge. So I hope you'll join us next week with Jeff Gumas. We're going to talk more about deep fakes, plagiarism, copyright, all of these things that I think are top of mind for people, especially educators. How are we going to cite this stuff? How are we going to know when we're seeing it at work? So join us next week, and then every Friday in May, 30 minutes, we'll get your EdTech bites, okay? I'm gonna go to the Q&A and answer some questions, and that will be all for today. If you are signing off to enjoy your weekend, then I hope you have an amazing weekend, and I hope you think a lot and post a lot about AI in adult ed. So let's see. Okay, I'm seeing a thank you, and I thank you right back. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm going to scroll up. Anonymous attendee said at the start of the webinar today that creating AI generated images would bypass copyright concerns. And that's a great question. And we're going to talk about that more next week. There's so much that we have to think about here because the systems are so complex. And it's like, what do you cite? Do you say what prompt you use so that other people can use it? Do you say what tool you use? Or it's technically yours. Can you not say anything at all? So great question there. When using the Canva image generating AI, how do you cite the image? Exactly, Kelly. So you kind of saw, I just mentioned that that was the tool that I used. There's what else can I do? Because it was a machine that created the image. So I just think for us as educators, my goal is always to educate, educate, educate. So if I use the tool, I want to tell everybody that I used it. We could also tell people what prompts we used. But other than that, it really is generated by a tool that, I mean, even in some cases you're paying for. So it is technically your property and you don't really need to cite the image. Thank you, Dr. Ron Suarez. Ron shared a link to what they are doing with GPT-4 on their website. They have some great resources. Please do check that out. Thank you. Having AI, yes, Kate, great one. In the workforce, another way AI is at work is by evaluating video interviews. Awesome. Yes, we will send the recording of the PowerPoint slides. Thank you all. Great to see you and chat with you. AI for adult ed, I messed that up. It's not in adult ed, it's for adult ed, AI for adult ed. We'll look at the ones that said in anyway. Thanks, guys. Signing off.